Today, something to crow about. Crows have long fascinated humans. These clever and crafty corvids can be found in fables and the subject of fantasy franchises. We're taking a much more local angle by visiting the Crow Lab at UVM, where an attempted murder is always welcome. Good afternoon, and thank you for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva, in for Amy Finley. Let's begin with some crow facts. Certain species of crows can craft and use tools. Their intelligence rivals that of apes. Crows gossip, hold grudges, and recognize human faces, which is probably why they gossip and hold grudges. They speak to one another and can mimic human speech and environmental sounds. Crows hold funerals not to mourn, but to assess risk with fellow birds of a feather. While the long-standing segment on Across the Fence about our feathered friends, Bird Notes, comes to you on the fourth Wednesday of every month, when we heard about a class at UVM called the CROW Lab, which stands for Corvid Relational Observatory and Workshop, we knew we had to check it out. Here's a bird's eye view from the class.
Lots of famous examples of sort of talking crows and ravens where they are mimicking. Like, you know, there's a kind of a sound trigger. I saw a thing on YouTube where the person's playing a piano and then they stop and then the bird goes la 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 or something like that, right? There's some kind of conversation in there. They're like, oh, this triggers this word based on what I know and associate with that word. So anyway, that's what I've been thinking about. What have you been thinking about? What is your research projects?
Kudos to Aiden Holmes, who interned for us this semester. He shot and edited that piece. Joining me is one of my favorite guests to our program, Luis Vivanco. He's a cultural anthropologist and the chair of UVM's Department of Anthropology. Welcome back, Luis.
Thank you, Keith. I think between the pit and Across the Fence, this is must-watch TV for folks like me.
Well, thank you for that endorsement. When we talked previously, it was about comics. We're going to talk about those again. The comics that you talked about before were about bicycles and the history of bicycles. I don't know how that connects to crows, but perhaps you can chart the course.
Great. It's a twisted line, as is the case with a lot of cultural anthropologists. But I'll sort of start by saying, generally, I'm a scholar of sustainability and, you know, how are people navigating and addressing the huge human impact on the natural world. So I have different, I would say, strategic entry points and curiosities that drive me into that bigger question. One of those is I've studied nature conservation at the community level and ecotourism. I've also studied bicycles in terms of what role do they play in the future of urban sustainability. So
certainly
that's the
ecotourism,
entry.
bicycles, yep.
And another strategic entry point actually has been birds for me. All throughout my career, I've been monitoring and tracking the ways birds find their way into or are pulled into sustainability battles and efforts because they can be quite charismatic and draw a lot of attention. So for example, my very first academic publication was about the resplendent quetzal in Costa Rica and how it gets pulled into ecotourism economies as a spectacle, as something that people should go look for to orient their experience, as a justification for conservation. And what's interesting to me about that bird is not just that people project all this onto them, but they have agency. They show up when they want to show up. They ruin tourist vacations when they don't show up, right? So I've been sensitive to this for a long time, the role of birds in broader sustainability dynamics.
I remember when our children were younger, we did a tour of the zoo and we drove by the lion cage, and the lion cage was not, the lion was not on that day, so the kids didn't see a lion. So I'm glad it happens in real nature as well as just the zoo.
Yes.
All research starts with a question, or in this case, questions. Tell us how the Crow Lab took flight, so to speak, from interactions with students.
Yeah, so I do this crazy thing. It's a fun thing in my big introduction to cultural anthropology class. It's called random questions. And students can ask me anything about anything. And part of it's to spark their curiosity, and another part is to give them a chance to model how an anthropologist thinks about material, new material. And one day, a couple of years ago, a student asked me about crows and what's the deal with all these crow roosts in Burlington. And that is something I've started paying attention to, because when I first moved here 30 years ago, you didn't see the crow roosts, but they started happening over time, and they drew my personal attention, and I'm out there with audio recording, and I'm like really into this. So I just started talking about the crow roost, and students are suddenly like, wow, we're talking about crows in anthropology class. And then more crow questions started coming up throughout the semester. And at the end of it, some students came up to me and said, how do we keep going? We want to learn more about crows and about anthropology and crows. And so that's how the Crow Lab came about. I opened up this opportunity for what I think of as a mentored undergraduate research opportunity. So it's not a real formal class, but it was sort of, what have I been calling it? A confederation of curious minds.
Well, let's be careful. We don't want to. It's definitely a real class. You can really take
you
it.
You get credit. Yes.
You get credit.
Yeah.
There's a classroom.
Yes.
Students come. We saw Aiden's footage earlier. So what do students learn? Obviously, it sounds like something a little bit different than they'd learn in an ornithology class, let's say.
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. I think I am trying to get them to learn anthropology. And so one question that I've introduced them to is, well, how does anthropology what kind of methods can we use when we decenter the human, right? Where our methods are all focused on humans, but how do we recognize that, humanity is an interspecies relationship? And so there's a whole bunch of methods that we've been experimenting with in recent years of how do you bring non-humans into our studies of humans. So that's one piece. So it's a methods thing. I think there's another piece of, ornithology. We do study that. Like, we are interested in what science says.
Right.
We have to know that. But at the same time, I tell them we're kind of not ornithologists, we're more ornithographers, which is how do you contextualize crow lives in the human context, right? Because they live amongst humans, or at least they roost amongst humans, and they're there for good reason. Crows are synanthropes, which means they thrive in spaces disturbed by humans. So we're part of their equation, so we need to put that into context if we want to understand crows.
Now you've given me synanthropes to try to sneak that into casual conversation.
It's a good one.
We teased it at the top that there are projects. It's a real class. So what are some of the research projects students are working on this semester?
So one that I'm really fascinated by is the students inquiring into the idea of crow-human co-evolution. And so there's a good argument to be made that crows and other corvids have evolved as a genus in relationship with humans because they do thrive amongst humans, but they also get hunted by humans, and so there's selective pressures on them. The human side of that evolution question is interesting. It's a harder one to answer, I think. How did humans evolve as a species or as a genus in relation with corvids? That's really hard to answer, but corvids have been there in our artistic expression, in our burials for, in tens and tens of thousands of years.
Right.
So she's trying to work through what does that coevolution argument look like from the anthropology side.
Okay.
That's one project. There's another project. We have a student who works at the Fleming Museum, and there's a raven mask in the collection, and this student got really interested in what's the story behind that raven mask, what's the aesthetics and the symbolism of the raven. And this is a student who's much more interested in the symbolism of crows across cultures.
When you're developing a class like this, are you just like, look, I've got to get these facts out, or is it you're discovering along with them, oh, I didn't know crows did that?
It's the latter. I'm discovering right along with them. I approach my job as like I am paid to be a learner, and it's an amazing job as a result. And so I come at them with my own questions, what I'm curious about, and maybe help them think about how do you frame this anthropologically.
Right.
But then I really put it on their laps and I say, here's an opportunity for you to do your own questioning. And so what are you curious about?
Right.
For a lot of students, that's both liberating and intimidating. So some of it is helping them gain confidence in how to ask really interesting, answerable questions.
Become learners and teachers themselves.
Exactly.
Well, one of the unique aspects of the Crow Lab is to take field trips. You could call them crow walks. And I accompanied you this year, Luis, on a cold, overcast, windy, late afternoon. Let's take a look.
There's the cemetery.
They're up on
that
top
church.
of that church.
The belfry?
Like to the
Next-
left of it.
Yeah,
to
no,
the
it's
left
fine
of the
up
belfry,
at
yeah.
the top.
Yeah, one of them just flew away.
Towards the water?
Yeah, it seems like it.
Do you get extra credit for being out here or anything like
No
that?
extra credit. It is just for the experience of looking for crows and not finding them, which is all part of the learning process.
Yeah, that's a crow. It was either a crow or a rag flapping in the wind.
I see something that looks like
Yeah.
That's totally
That
a
is a
plastic
plastic
bag.
That's absolutely a plastic bag, unfortunately.
That's totally a plastic bag.
It does look.
If we don't see anything, we ask questions. One of my questions is, on a windy day, are they going to go somewhere more protected?
Guys, we saw 7 crows.
That says crows. Keep the faith. The crows will be back.
Yeah, they knew, you know, they were messing with us.
It's their delinquency.
Okay, so we didn't see a lot of crows. And Luis, I guess this is part of like not seeing crows. Something gets learned out of not seeing as well as seeing crows.
Oh, absolutely. We did see crows in other occasions, just so you know. And we were working on some intel that was not great. But it's also the crows. The crows have agency. They change their roosts and to avoid predators and so on. But I see the opportunity of just getting outside and off the hill and into the field, if you will, because anthropology is truly a field work-based discipline. And so I have this wonderful book that I've read called Outside Lies Magic. It's about urban exploration. There's this wonderful quotation. It's this guy, John Stilgoe, and he says, exploration is a liberal art because it is an art that liberates, that frees, that opens up from narrowness, and it's fun.
Well, it's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much. I always enjoy spending time with you. To see more of Luis's work and to check out his bicycle comics that I mentioned, visit the website on the screen, illustratedwheel.com. My thanks to the team behind the scenes here at WCX, who always give me something to crow about. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.